Hey y'all, so today I wanted to do a bit of a discussion. It's been quite a while since I filmed a discussion video on my channel. I really like doing them, but it takes me a long time to kind of figure out different discussion topics that I really want to go over. And the other day I was kind of just inspired to make this video, so I decided to just go ahead and do it. And since this is a discussion video, I do hope that you guys watching will sound off in the comments and start a discussion down there, which would be super awesome. And since discussions do have a tendency to sometimes get a little bit heated and to get people a little bit angry, I just want to put a little disclaimer out there to please try to keep an open mind and stay reasonable if you do comment. I want to have a nice little discussion, not people yelling at each other. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the topic that I wanted to talk about for this video, which centers around fluffy books. And what I mean by fluffy books are often contemporary books that are cute, often have some sort of romance, and a lot of people tend to think of them as not having much substance. And I guess that I could boil this topic down to the question, are fluffy books inherently worse than other types of books? And to many of you, this may sound like a dumb question for various reasons, but I think that a lot of people who read tend to look at fluffy books as a lesser thing. Maybe not purposely, but in the way that they talk about them. And the idea to do this was actually inspired by the draft that I'm currently working on of my story and the book that I'm hoping to read sometime near the end of the week when I finally finish the draft. As you may be able to tell from some of the books behind me, I really like fantasy novels. Fantasy is my favorite genre, and I also really love a lot of sci-fi, some mysteries, and sometimes the occasional contemporary. Which is kind of ironic because a lot of the stories that I tend to write tend to be contemporary stories, and because I've been working on this contemporary story, I kind of got in the mood to read a contemporary story. And the one that immediately came to mind is a book by Jennifer Eccles called The Boys Next Door. This is a book that I think I first read in junior high, and so it's one that I've been familiar with for quite a while, and it's pretty much what a lot of people would consider to be a cute, fluffy contemporary story. And overall, it's just a really lighthearted and cute story. It stays in that like fluffy realm the entire time, and it doesn't really delve into any really dark topics. It's a book that I've actually already reread at least once, so it's a book that I've really enjoyed, but when I went onto my Goodreads, I realized that I'd only given it 3 stars out of 5. So upon seeing that rating, I was a little bit confused because I was like, maybe this isn't my favorite book that I've ever read, but this is at least a 4-star book for me, right? I mean, I've reread it once already, I enjoyed it both times, and I'm going to be rereading it again, so that's obviously a book that I really enjoyed and would consider one that I would put higher than a 3-star rating. And then I thought about it and I tried to think of my mindset when I last rated it, and I realized that I gave it a 3-star rating because it was a fluffy contemporary that I didn't consider to have much depth. And that got me thinking about what constitutes a good book, and that also got me thinking about the main overarching question that I introduced at the beginning of this, which is, are fluffy books inherently worse than other types of books because they are fluffy? And I feel like people watching this will be in one of two camps, both thinking that this question is kind of a dumb one to ask, because I feel like some people will be sitting watching this and think, of course that doesn't make it worse than other types of books, it just makes it a different genre. And I feel like some other people will watch this and think this question is dumb because, of course, for them, that makes it not as good as other books that delve into deeper and darker topics and more serious subject matter. So I kind of just wanted to sit down and to discuss this idea from multiple different angles and talk about my personal opinions on where these fluffy stories stand within literature in general. And right off the bat, I feel like when a lot of people go to talk about the merits of contemporary stories, they'll often hit on the real life application of some of these things. Like, contemporaries often talk about mental health issues and depression and anxiety and stuff like that. And while I definitely do think that that is a great bonus about contemporary stories, I don't want to touch on that too much because I just kind of want to focus on, what if a story is just a cute fluffy romance? Does that make it worse than other books that do have those more important, more serious topics. So I feel like one way or another, the majority of people do consider fluffy stories to be lesser than many other types of stories. And this may not be a conscious thing, but I feel like a lot of us tend to put down fluffy stories a lot. I mean, when we consider the whole concept of guilty pleasure reads, like excluding guilty pleasure movies, TV shows, whatever, just think about guilty pleasure reads. The whole concept of having a guilty pleasure is that you're consuming some sort of media that you are slightly embarrassed to be consuming. Like, you either think it's of a lesser quality or it's not something you would typically enjoy, and usually it's something lighter or more fluffy, like one of these fluffy stories. And I feel like this idea of guilty pleasures and fluffy stories within guilty pleasures brings up a really interesting idea of what constitutes a good novel. Because like I said, guilty pleasures are often things that we enjoy despite acknowledging that it's of a lesser quality than the media that we typically tend to enjoy. And so by talking about fluffy stories and the concept of a guilty pleasure read, I feel like we're inherently saying that fluffy stories are of a lesser quality than other books that we read. And I'm not entirely sure that that is or should be the case, because I feel like this gets into the discussion of quality versus intent. And what I mean by this is, let's consider several different genres of books. I feel like most people would consider like the highest quality of novel or the best novels to be the literary fictions and the classics of the world. Like, those are the ones that most people would consider to be very good literature. And then I feel like genres like fantasy or sci-fi or other similar genres would be next because of the extensive world building or magic system or technology that has to be developed throughout the story. And then somewhere way down at the bottom would be the fluffy cutesy stories. And I'm not saying that this is how I personally consider it to be, but I feel like this is a lot of people's opinions, whether it's a conscious thing or a subconscious thing. And this is where I think the quality versus the intent discussion gets in here. Because I feel like most people equate mentally challenging books to quality books, and I don't think it's a one-to-one ratio here. There can be mentally challenging books that are not actually good books. Because let's be honest here, there can be bad books in every single genre, classics not excluded. Because there could be a book that is very complex and mentally challenging, but maybe the plot isn't very good, or maybe the writing's really great, but the characters are really underdeveloped. And so does that inherently make it a good book just because it's a mentally challenging book? I don't think so. Because for me, the things that make up a good novel are things like a good plot, good character development, good writing, and a good world build if it's applicable, and that can be present in every single genre, regardless of its intent. And when I talk about the intent, I mean, what did the writer set out to do? Did they set out to write a beautiful literary masterpiece, or maybe they set out to write a cute, fluffy romance? But maybe that person that set out to write a literary masterpiece failed in other areas. Maybe their writing is really amazing, but maybe their plot's not that great, or maybe their world build is pretty flimsy. Whereas maybe that contemporary writer wrote a really great fluffy story. Maybe the characters are really relatable, the romance is very realistic and well written, and the plot is really enjoyable. Does that make it still a worse book than the poorly written literary fiction? I don't think so. And I also just want to point out that just because a book might be more complex and more mentally challenging for the reader doesn't mean it was necessarily more complex and mentally challenged for the writer than a cute, fluffy story. Because I don't know how many of y'all have tried to write a book, but regardless of the genre, that is not an easy thing to do. And it's especially not easy to do well. Think of a cute, fluffy romance story that you've read. Think about how relatable you found the characters and how cute you found the romance. Do you think that that was easy to do? Do you think that it was easy for the author to just come up with these relatable characters? I mean, like, maybe sometimes inspiration strikes, but writing a book takes a lot of work regardless of what the genre is. Any cute romance that you've ever read has taken a while for the author to develop. Any relatable character that you've read has taken the author a long time to develop. These aren't things that just fall onto the page. These are things that take a while to come to life. And I feel like if you say that cute fluffy stories are not as good as other stories, you're kind of devaluing all the time and effort that the writer spent to put together that book. Now let me backtrack just a little bit to a point that I made earlier in the video, which was that there can be poorly written, poorly structured books in every genre, and the same is definitely true for cute fluffy books. Because of course there are tons of cute fluffy books that have realistic and relatable characters and cute romances, but there are also cute fluffy books that are maybe not so cute because they're not so well written, and maybe the characters aren't that great, and maybe the plot wasn't very well developed. But like I said earlier in the video, the same is true for every other genre too. There are going to be poorly written, poorly structured books in every single genre. I mean, let's think back to that hierarchy of book genres that I presented earlier in the video. Classics are at the top of that list. But that doesn't exclude them from being problematic. I mean, think about some of the classics you've read. Think about maybe the sexism or the racism that might have been in there. Like, those are problematic things. But because it's a classic and because it's so beautifully written, a lot of people tend to overlook some of those more problematic aspects of the story. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't read certain classics because of the topics that arise in them, because that's honestly a topic for a completely different video. But I'm just saying that every single genre can be problematic. There can be bad books in every single genre. But I'm saying that we shouldn't consider an entire genre just to be of a lesser quality than other genres because it's a lighter and more fun read. And apart from everything else that I've said in this video, I feel like cute, fluffy stories have a really important purpose in our lives. I mean, there are guilty pleasures for a reason. Those are the books that we pick up when we need a pick-me-up. They're the happy stories that we turn to on a sad day, and I feel like if we consider these lighter stories to be lesser quality because they are lighter, we're discrediting a lot of what makes them great. So that, I believe, hits all the points that I wanted to talk about in this video. I'm sure that there are some points that I didn't think about or that I didn't discuss in this video, and if there are, if you think of any, please let me know down in the comments, start a discussion. I would love to chat about this more. But like I said in the beginning of the video, let's try to keep our discussion pretty calm and civil and reasonable, because that makes for a lot more interesting of a discussion than when people are yelling at each other and bashing each other's opinions. As always, links to all my social media will be down in the description, including Specialis Revelio Harry Potter, which I will be getting back to once I get on break and once I finish this draft of my novel. It has been put to the side very briefly because like I said, I've been noveling, so I will definitely get back on that once I hit my winter break. Other than that, my main blog, Twitter, and Goodreads will also be down in the description. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you on Goodreads. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.